On December 12, 1910, at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold, age 25, walked out of Brentano's bookstore at 5th Avenue and 27th Street in Manhattan. She was carrying a box of chocolates and had purchased a book of short stories. She told the saleswoman she was going home. She was seen walking north on 5th Avenue toward her family's mansion at 108 East 79th Street. And then she vanished, completely, absolutely, as if she had stepped through a doorway into nothing. Before we dive into one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries in American history, a case where unlimited money and social power couldn't find a missing woman, where every lead disappeared into nothing, and every theory raises more questions than it answers, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to discover is a true crime case that has haunted investigators for over a century. Drop a comment with your theory about what happened to Dorothy Arnold, because this case remains unsolved, and maybe someone watching has the missing piece. And share this video, because Dorothy's family suppressed this story for decades, tried to keep it quiet, and she deserves to be remembered. Subscribe now. Because the mystery of the vanishing heiress reveals how wealth can hide secrets and how powerful families control narratives. This is the story of Dorothy Arnold, the daughter of one of New York's wealthiest families, beautiful, educated, ambitious, who walked into nothing on a December afternoon. This is the story of the investigation that followed, the private detectives, the police, the theories, the suspects, the dead ends. This is the story of a family that tried to hide their daughter's disappearance, that refused to cooperate with police, that seemed more concerned with avoiding scandal than finding Dorothy. And this is the story of all the women who have vanished, the cases that never get solved, the lives that end in question marks. Dorothy Arnold was born on July 1st, 1885, into exactly the kind of family that dominated Gilded Age New York. Her father, Francis Arnold, was a wealthy perfume importer. The family business was F.R. Arnold and Company. The Arnold fortune was estimated at $2 million, roughly $60 million today. Not Vanderbilt money, but substantial, old enough to be respectable. Dorothy grew up in luxury at the family mansion on East 79th Street, private schools, finishing school at Bryn Mawr College, summers in Bar Harbor, Maine, everything the daughter of wealth was supposed to have. She was beautiful, with dark hair and striking features. She was photographed often, appeared in society pages, was considered one of New York's eligible young women. But Dorothy was not content with the role assigned to her. She wanted to be a writer. She wrote short stories and sent them to magazines, hoping to be published. Every submission was rejected. This was 1910. Women writers existed but faced enormous barriers. And Dorothy's writing, by accounts of those who read it, was competent but not exceptional. The rejections devastated her. She had been raised to believe she was special, talented, destined for significance. The rejections suggested she was ordinary. By December 1910, Dorothy was 25, unmarried, which was becoming socially awkward. Women of her class were expected to marry by 23. She had a secret relationship with a man her parents disapproved of, George Griscom Jr. He was from a respectable family, but was unreliable, unfocused, traveled constantly. Dorothy and George had been corresponding secretly for over a year. Her parents had forbidden the relationship, but Dorothy continued to see him when possible. On December 12th, 1910, Dorothy's day seemed entirely normal. She had breakfast with her family. Her mother would later recall nothing unusual in her demeanor. Around 11 a.m., Dorothy told her mother she was going shopping. She wanted to buy an evening dress. She left the house around 11:30. She stopped at the Park and Tilford store on 5th Avenue around noon, met her friend Gladys King by chance. They chatted briefly. Dorothy seemed cheerful, normal. mentioned she was shopping for a dress, said she was going to walk further up Fifth Avenue. Around 2 p.m., Dorothy entered Brentano's bookstore. She bought a book, Engaged Girl Sketches, a collection of humorous stories. She also purchased a box of chocolates. The transaction was recorded. The saleswoman would later testify that Dorothy seemed entirely normal, pleasant, not distressed. Dorothy left Brentano's around 2:15 p.m. The saleswoman watched her walk north on Fifth Avenue. And that was the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy Arnold. She was walking north on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight, in one of the busiest parts of Manhattan, and then she simply wasn't anymore. Chapter 2. The Family's Secret. What happened next is almost as strange as the disappearance itself, because the Arnold family did not report Dorothy missing. Not that day, not the next day, not for 6 weeks. When Dorothy didn't return home on December 12th, her parents were concerned, but not alarmed. They assumed she had gone to visit friends, perhaps had lost track of time. When she didn't return by evening, they became worried, but they still didn't contact police. Francis Arnold, Dorothy's father, was a proud man, deeply concerned with social reputation. The idea of his daughter's disappearance becoming public scandal was intolerable. Instead of going to police, he hired private detectives, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, the same firm that had hunted bank robbers and labor organizers. The Pinkertons began investigating immediately but quietly, interviewing Dorothy's friends, checking hotels, following leads. For 6 weeks, the Arnold family maintained the fiction that Dorothy was away, visiting relatives, traveling. They told society friends that she was fine. Meanwhile, Dorothy's mother was privately desperate. She knew something was wrong. She wanted to go to police. But Francis refused. He believed that if the disappearance became public, it would create scandal regardless of how Dorothy was found. If she had eloped, scandal. If she had run away, scandal. If she had been murdered, scandal. Better to find her quietly, bring her home, suppress whatever had happened. This decision, to prioritize reputation over Dorothy's safety, would define the case. By late January 1911, the Pinkertons had made no progress. They had interviewed dozens of people, followed numerous false leads, found nothing. The Arnold family was finally forced to admit they needed police help. On January 26, 1911, Francis Arnold reluctantly reported Dorothy missing to the New York Police Department. By then, Dorothy had been missing for 6 weeks. The trail was cold. Potential witnesses had forgotten details. Crucial time had been lost. The police were immediately suspicious of the family. Why had they waited so long? What were they hiding? When questioned, Francis Arnold was defensive, evasive. He refused to discuss Dorothy's personal life, insisted there was nothing unusual about her. He specifically refused to discuss George Griscom Jr., even though police quickly learned about Dorothy's relationship with him. The police suspected the family knew more than they were saying, that they were protecting someone or something. Meanwhile, the story broke in newspapers, and it became a sensation. Heiress vanishes from Fifth Avenue. Society girl missing 6 weeks. The headlines were everywhere. Dorothy's photograph appeared in papers across the country. The case became one of the most reported missing person cases in American history. But the publicity created its own problems. Dozens of people came forward claiming to have seen Dorothy in Philadelphia, in Boston, in California, in Europe. Every sighting had to be investigated. Most were mistaken identity or attention-seeking. The real leads became buried in false ones. Chapter 3. The Suspects and Theories. As the investigation progressed, several theories emerged about what had happened to Dorothy Arnold. Each theory had evidence supporting it. Each had problems. Theory 1. Dorothy eloped with George Griscom Jr. George was in Italy when Dorothy disappeared. He had left New York in November, was traveling in Europe. When police contacted him, he claimed to know nothing about Dorothy's disappearance, said he had received letters from her, but nothing suggesting she planned to run away. He was questioned extensively by Italian police at the request of NYPD. His hotel records were checked. His movements were accounted for. There was no evidence he had returned to New York, and Dorothy had no passport, couldn't have traveled to Europe to meet him. The elopement theory was further weakened when George returned to New York in February 1911. Cooperated fully with the investigation, seemed genuinely distressed. But Dorothy had written to George frequently, and some of those letters were suggestive. In one letter discovered later, Dorothy wrote, "I am tired of this life. I want to be with you, even if it means giving up everything." This suggested she might have planned to run away, but without George's involvement, where would she have gone? Theory 2. Dorothy was pregnant and died from a botched abortion. This theory was whispered about, but never officially investigated. Abortion was illegal in 1910, discussing it was scandalous. But Dorothy's age, her relationship with George, the secretiveness of her family, all suggested possibility. If Dorothy was pregnant and desperate, she might have sought an illegal abortion. These procedures often went wrong, resulting in death. Bodies of women who died from botched abortions were sometimes disposed of secretly to avoid scandal for both the woman's family and the person who performed the procedure. This would explain why Dorothy disappeared completely, why no body was ever found, why the family was so secretive. But there was no evidence Dorothy was pregnant. No witnesses reported her seeming ill or changing physically. No one came forward claiming involvement. Theory 3. Dorothy was murdered by someone she knew. This theory focused on the fact that Dorothy disappeared from a busy street in daylight with no struggle, suggesting she went willingly with someone. Someone she knew, someone she trusted, someone who then killed her. Several suspects were investigated, including John Arnold, Dorothy's younger brother, who had a troubled relationship with her. John was questioned multiple times. His movements on December 12th were accounted for, but police felt he was hiding something. Another suspect was a social acquaintance named Ulva Belmont Jr., who had been seen talking to Dorothy at a party days before she disappeared. But no physical evidence connected anyone to Dorothy's disappearance. It remained speculation. Theory 4. Dorothy committed suicide. This theory suggested Dorothy was depressed about her failed writing career, her restricted life, her forbidden relationship. She might have thrown herself in the East River or Hudson River. Bodies in the water often weren't recovered. But Dorothy had shown no signs of suicidal ideation. She seemed cheerful on December 12th, was making plans, buying Christmas presents, and suicides usually left notes. Dorothy left nothing. Theory 5. Dorothy ran away and started a new life. This theory suggested Dorothy carefully planned her disappearance, saved money, created a new identity, deliberately vanished to escape her restricted life. The chocolates and books she purchased could have been misdirection, suggesting she was shopping normally when she was actually executing an escape plan. She might have traveled to a different city, found work, lived under a different name. But Dorothy had no money of her own. Her father controlled the family finances. She couldn't access substantial funds without his knowledge, and starting over in 1910 as a woman alone would have been extremely difficult. She would have needed work, references, a believable story. Investigators checked records of women matching Dorothy's description in other cities, found nothing conclusive. Chapter 4. The investigation deepens. As weeks became months, the investigation into Dorothy Arnold's disappearance grew increasingly desperate and increasingly strange. The New York Police Department assigned their best detectives, interviewed hundreds of people, followed thousands of leads. Every person who had seen Dorothy on December 12th was questioned repeatedly, their statements compared, inconsistencies explored. The saleswoman at Brentano's was interviewed dozens of times, asked to remember every detail, what Dorothy was wearing, what she said, how she seemed. Gladys King, Dorothy's friend who had seen her on Fifth Avenue, was questioned extensively about their conversation, whether Dorothy seemed nervous, whether she mentioned plans. Every shop, hotel, restaurant, train station in Manhattan was canvassed. Staff shown Dorothy's photograph, asked if they'd seen her. Police dragged sections of the East River and Hudson River, searching for a body, found nothing. They investigated every hospital, morgue, asylum in the region. No unidentified women matching Dorothy's description. They checked ship passenger lists, train tickets, hotel registries across the country. No Dorothy Arnold, no one using obvious variations of her name. The investigation cost the Arnold family an estimated $50,000, roughly $1.5 million today. They spared no expense. But money couldn't find Dorothy, couldn't generate leads that led anywhere. One particularly strange development came in March 1911, when Dorothy's mother received a letter, postmarked Philadelphia, claiming to be from Dorothy. The letter was brief. "I am safe. I cannot come home. Please do not search for me. I am happier than I have been in years." The handwriting resembled Dorothy's, but experts couldn't definitively confirm it. It might have been clever forgery. Police investigated the Philadelphia connection intensively, checked hotels, boarding houses, employment agencies, found nothing. More letters came over the following months, from different cities, all claiming to be from Dorothy, all asking the family to stop searching. None could be verified. Most were likely hoaxes, people taking advantage of a famous case. In June 1911, a woman's body was found in a remote area of New Jersey, badly decomposed, unidentifiable. The Arnold family was notified. They were devastated, certain this was Dorothy. But dental records didn't match. The body was of a woman several inches shorter than Dorothy. It wasn't her. This pattern repeated. Unidentified bodies would be found. The Arnolds would be notified, would travel to morgues to view remains, would be disappointed. Each false identification was traumatic, reopening wounds, raising hopes, only to crush them. By 1912, the official police investigation was winding down. They had exhausted leads. The case was going cold. Francis Arnold continued hiring private detectives, but they found nothing new, just repeated the same investigations, interviewed the same people. The Arnold family's grief was complicated by guilt. They hadn't reported Dorothy missing immediately. They had prioritized reputation over her safety. Had those 6 weeks made the difference? If they'd gone to police on December 12th, would Dorothy have been found? The question haunted them, particularly Dorothy's mother, who became increasingly withdrawn, depressed. She died in 1928, 17 years after Dorothy disappeared, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Francis Arnold became obsessed with the case, spent the rest of his life investigating, died in 1922, convinced Dorothy had been murdered, but unable to prove it. Chapter 5. The theories that remain. Over a century later, Dorothy Arnold's disappearance remains unsolved. But modern investigators, historians, and amateur sleuths have continued examining the case, developing new theories. Theory 6. Dorothy was a victim of human trafficking. This theory, which wouldn't have been articulated in 1910 because the concept wasn't well understood, suggests Dorothy was kidnapped for forced prostitution. White slavery, as it was called then, was a real phenomenon. Young women were kidnapped or tricked into brothels. But Dorothy was wealthy, recognizable. Her disappearance was too high profile for traffickers to risk, and human trafficking victims were usually vulnerable, poor, without family connections. Dorothy was the opposite. Theory 7. Dorothy had a secret mental illness. This theory suggests Dorothy was suffering from depression, psychosis, or dissociation that her family hid. On December 12th, she might have had a psychotic break, wandered away confused, unable to remember her identity. She might have been institutionalized as a Jane Doe, never identified. This would explain why she was never found, why there were no sightings. She was in an asylum under a different name. But Dorothy showed no signs of mental illness in her letters, in witnesses' descriptions, in her behavior, and institutions were required to check missing person reports. Dorothy's case was so famous that someone should have connected her. Theory 8. The family knew what happened and covered it up. This is perhaps the darkest theory. It suggests that Frances Arnold knew Dorothy was dead, knew how she died, and suppressed the information. Perhaps she died from a botched abortion that the family arranged, and they disposed of the body to avoid scandal. Perhaps she killed herself, and the family concealed the suicide because of the stigma. Perhaps something happened in the family home. An accident, violence, and the December 12th shopping trip was fiction to establish an alibi. This theory explains the family's strange behavior, the 6-week delay, the evasiveness, the control of information. But there's no evidence beyond suspicious behavior. And accusing a grieving family of covering up their daughter's death is serious. Theory 9. Dorothy is buried in the family plot. This macabre theory suggests Dorothy's body was secretly recovered, identified, and buried without announcement. The Arnold family plot in Woodlawn Cemetery has several graves. Some markers are ambiguous, but cemetery records don't show Dorothy Arnold buried there, and secretly burying her would have required extensive conspiracy. Theory 10. We'll never know. This is the least satisfying but possibly most accurate theory. Sometimes people disappear, and we never find out why. The circumstances were such that Dorothy could have met any number of fates, and the evidence that would tell us which simply doesn't exist anymore. A century later, everyone involved is dead. Physical evidence is long gone. Memories have faded into contradiction. Dorothy Arnold is just one of thousands of people who have vanished, who haunt the loved ones they left behind with absence and questions. Chapter 6. The weight of never knowing. What makes Dorothy Arnold's case particularly haunting is not just that she disappeared, but that every explanation seems both possible and impossible. She could have run away, but where did she get money? Where did she go? How did she survive? She could have been murdered, but by whom? Where was the body? Why was there no evidence? She could have committed suicide, but where? How? Why leave no note when she was a writer? She could have been trafficked, but she was too high profile, too connected, too recognizable. Every theory has elements that make sense and elements that don't. The case exists in a state of permanent ambiguity, and that ambiguity, that not knowing, is its own kind of torture for those left behind. Dorothy's mother spent 17 years not knowing, waking up every day to the same questions, the same absence. Every knock on the door might be news. Every letter might be from Dorothy. Every woman on the street who looked similar might be her. The not knowing is worse than knowing the worst, because knowing allows grief to complete, allows acceptance. Not knowing keeps the wound open, keeps hope and despair in constant rotation. The Arnold case also reveals how wealth and social position complicate tragedy. If Dorothy had been poor, her disappearance might not have been investigated at all, might have been one line in a police report. But because she was wealthy, Because her family could afford private detectives and publicity, her case became famous. Yet that same wealth created obstacles. The family's concern with reputation delayed investigation. Their control over information hindered police. Money couldn't buy answers, couldn't buy Dorothy back, couldn't buy closure. The case demonstrates the limits of wealth, shows that some things can't be purchased or controlled. Dorothy Arnold walked into absence on a December afternoon, and no amount of money could bring her back. Today, Dorothy's disappearance is remembered mostly by true crime enthusiasts, by people who collect unsolved mysteries. There's no memorial to her, no marker in Manhattan noting that this is where she was last seen. Her story has become one of many, another missing person case, another question mark. But Dorothy was a person, not a mystery. She wrote stories, had ambitions, had relationships, had a life before she walked out of Brentano's. She wanted to be a writer, wanted recognition, wanted to be more than just Frances Arnold's daughter, and instead, she became a cautionary tale, a ghost story, an unsolved mystery. Her final act of writing was unintentional. She wrote herself out of existence, became a narrative with no conclusion. Every December 12th, a few people remember, mark the anniversary, wonder again what happened. But mostly, Dorothy Arnold is forgotten, one of hundreds of thousands of people who have disappeared, who exist now only as questions. What happened to Dorothy Arnold? We don't know, we'll probably never know. And that not knowing, that permanent uncertainty, is the real horror of her story. Not that something bad happened, but that we can't know what. Not that she died, but that she vanished so completely that even death couldn't be confirmed. She walked into nothing, and nothing is where she remains. Somewhere, maybe, there's an explanation, a piece of evidence that would solve everything. But a century later, that evidence hasn't emerged. Dorothy Arnold is still missing. Still walking north on Fifth Avenue in December 1910, still about to disappear. Forever. In the eternal present tense of the unsolved case, where victims never die and never come home. They just vanish, and we're left with questions forever. If Dorothy Arnold's century-old disappearance haunts you, if you have theories about what happened to her, if you think you might know something that investigators missed, subscribe immediately and tell us in the comments. Hit that notification bell because we're investigating more unsolved mysteries from the Gilded Age, more women who vanished and were forgotten, more cases where wealth and power couldn't find answers. Drop a comment with your theory about Dorothy, where she went, what happened, whether she's buried somewhere unknown or lived out her life in secret. And share this video because Dorothy Arnold deserves to be remembered as more than just a mystery. She was a person with dreams and ambitions who vanished in broad daylight and nobody could find her. Subscribe now because cold cases like this need to stay alive in public memory. Because sometimes someone watching has the missing piece. Because the girl who never came home deserves people still looking for her over a century later. The next unsolved mystery we're investigating is just as baffling, just as tragic, and just as forgotten by history.